Welcome in, Falcons fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for more Atlanta Falcons content. Roster right now is currently set as is. Could change before game one of the regular season, but we do have a roster cut down, 53-man roster now for us to break down. As well as the practice squad, as the Falcons have filled out both that and the practice squad today. So we're going to get my thoughts on what I think of each position. I know there's some people who were surprised that were cut. I know there were some people who were surprised about certain people who didn't make it, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm going to give all my thoughts during this video, and as well as obviously the offensive line situation, especially that right tackle spot, Caleb McGarry going on the IR, and who they've brought in to try to basically kind of have an open competition at that spot to be able to fill that hole and protect the blind side of Michael Penix Jr. So we're going to talk about all that today on this episode. Obviously, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment down below. I appreciate all the love you guys give, and let's go ahead and dive right into it. So we're going to obviously start with the quarterback room, 53-man roster. 2 quarterbacks, which is normal for a lot of teams. I think when the league kind of changed the rule a couple of years ago, I think it made it more prevalent to have just 2 guys. A lot of people were surprised that Easton Stick was cut. People really thought the Falcons were going to go into the regular season with 3 quarterbacks, but that was not the case. Michael Penix Jr. and Kirk Cousins are the 2. Now, some people may be wondering, with the Kirk Cousins thing and the bit of uncertainty there, is this the Falcons maybe feeling like, hey, we think we're going to have Kirk for the season? Right now, there are no major quarterback injuries that would make Kirk a very desired asset right now for teams. So I think they're comfortable going with those 2 guys and saying, hey, Penix gets hurt. We fully believe in Kirk Cousins, especially if he's healthier this year. And they're going to go with that. And I think Easton they brought back to the practice squad, so he'll be the emergency 3rd quarterback, of course. He led all quarterbacks in the preseason in passing yards. So I think, like I said, some people were surprised by the cut of Easton Stick, but it makes sense in the grand scheme of things as we continue to go through the roster. Running backs, again, pretty self-explanatory. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, you knew were going to make the call. The battle was really at that running back 3. Carlos Washington Jr. was cut. The guy they signed from the UFL was cut. So that left it up to one guy, an undrafted free agent that they picked up this offseason, and Nathan Carter from Michigan State. He had that long 40-yard touchdown in this game 2 of the preseason, and I think really impressed a lot of coaches to the point where they said, hey, we're comfortable with this man being RB3. And so this is obviously a good win for the scouting department. When you're going out there, you're evaluating some of these undrafted free agents, you have wide open positions. You always kind of a little wonder, could a guy like that potentially sneak their way onto the roster and have a good showing? And I think Nathan had a really good showing during the preseason. So he's a guy that you could kind of tell that they liked. He's kind of gotten the majority of the reps in terms of carries in the preseason. And so I think that they feel pretty good about him if something happens to Bijan or Tyler Algier. But, obviously, those guys have relatively been healthy for the last couple of years. So, if they've needed, Nathan Carter should be ready to go. And, I'm excited for him. I'm happy for him to make the 53-man roster. Now let's get to the receiving core, and that's where I think things get interesting. So they keep 7. I think a lot of people were projecting, would they keep 5? Would they keep 6? They kept 7 wide receivers. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray McLeod, Cordero Hodge, Casey Washington, David Stills, and Jamal Agnew. Now, the big conversation really during the entire training camp preseason portion was with Jamal Agnew's value on special teams. People didn't know how many the Falcons would actually keep. If they were going to keep 6, then David Stills probably wouldn't be on the roster right now, because Agnew was going to get a spot just off of that alone. Because I don't see the Falcons are probably not going to use him as a receiver. He is strictly there for punt and kick return duties, right? But remember, if you think about my last video, I talked about David Stills. I talked about he hasn't played in preseason games, which usually is an indication, especially with a Raheem Morris coach team, that he probably has a job. But it was just weird to people because, David Stills was someone you heard a lot early in camp, had a good chemistry, a good reputation, a good connection with Kirk Cousins in the second team. And he was definitely showing out during those portions. And so the fact that he would come into the preseason games and the Falcons really didn't need to play him, I said it wouldn't make sense to cut him, but not it wouldn't make sense to cut him if you weren't going to play him. If you're not going to play him, then he probably needs to be making the team, which he did. So essentially, if you look at that, it made it unlikely that the other two, Chris Blair and Nick Nash, were going to make the team. Now, some people have really been up in arms about Nick Nash and why he didn't make the team. Now, from my observations of Nick Nash, I'm a Nick Nash guy. I was excited for him coming out of San Jose State, picking him up as an undrafted free agent for the Falcons. Nick Nash, I want to specify, did not have a bad camp. He did not have a bad camp. I just think Nick Nash didn't do anything to separate himself. Like I felt like he was a guy who, as camp and preseason went on, you saw and heard a little bit more of him, which hence in the last preseason game, he had his best game. But he was never bad either. So it was just one of those things where I think if you're the team, you're looking at him, hey, he's been good for us. Again, undrafted guy. You put him in your development program. You put him in your system. Let him grow. There's no pressure for him to make the 53-man roster now. He has a home. If you have injuries at receiver, him or Chris Blair are going to get called up to the roster. I think that there's nothing wrong with Nick Nash not making the team. I know some people, like I said, especially because we didn't see David Stills in preseason games, because you didn't think when we signed him, he was an automatic lock. And I don't know when the Falcons made that decision to say he's on this roster for sure. But I think that really kind of made it very unlikely that the other two would make it. And I think Nick had a good camp, not a special camp, and that's okay. He'll be back around next year. We'll see how he continues to grow with them, and we'll see if maybe next year creates an opportunity for him to maybe make the roster. And obviously, Chris Blair, as I mentioned a couple of times, he's had a very strong camp. He's someone who I feel like has impressed year after year in preseason and camp, and it's just a situation where the Falcons have a lot of receivers they like. But again, somebody gets hurt, Chris Blair can get up. Last couple of seasons, he's kind of finished with the Falcons. They've had some injuries to the receiver core. He's been called up, and then he'll play a little bit in these games. So overall, I think the Falcons, if you're them, you probably feel really good about your receiver depth. You feel really good about your receiver group. I know some people are going to look at name value and think after Drake London and Darnell Mooney, you don't have much. But, I mean, Ray, he stepped up. Cordell Hodge, we know his value on special teams. Casey Washington really had a strong camp, and Raheem Morris alluded to that multiple times, what he did. And then, like I said, David Stills wasn't playing in preseason games, and Jamal Agnew, we know his value in the return game. So receiver group, I think the Falcons actually feel very strongly about from the roster to the practice squad. So I think that's something that, they obviously feel good about. And also I mentioned the fact that Darnell Mooney was not put on any PUP, any IR, does signal that he could be back in week 1. We still don't know if he will, but the fact he was put on the list, the Falcons do not expect to be without Darnell Mooney that much longer. So we're going to have to see how that continues to kind of shape out and see if they'll get their their wide receiver 2 back on the team for week 1. Now, tight ends might have surprised a little people. I projected them to keep 3. They kept 4. Now, Kyle Pitts, Charlie Warner, Teagan, the guy they signed from the Houston Texans this offseason, which he was known as a good blocker. He just couldn't stay healthy. As the camp went on, you kind of saw those 3 being it. But the wild card has always been Felipe Franks, because Felipe Franks has a very certain type of reputation within the Falcons fan base. And people didn't think he was going to make the roster. People thought Felipe was going to be a camp body. He made the roster. And where Felipe has his value is on special teams. Again, some of the moves the Falcons have made, you can clearly see that they are special teams minded moves. And they want to have a strong special teams unit. So that these moves reflect that. But again, I don't think, because again, this offense isn't really dictated around tight ends. You're like, man, they're keeping 4. Maybe you could raise a question. Does that mean you potentially use Pitts in a wide receiver type of way more, where Charlie Warner will be used more in an inline tight end type of way? And so, if an injury happens to one of them, you still have some guys behind them that can step into that role. like a Felipe, which I think Felipe would be fourth on the depth chart if it was me, and then Teagan would be third. But it's just interesting to kind of see how that played out. But I mean, they obviously, like I said, they feel like got a special teams contributor, a good blocking tight end, two of them really, and then we'll see what Kyle Pitts can do this year for the Falcons. So obviously, that's something that I think some people were surprised by it as well. So now we get to the offensive line: Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Ryan Newsel, Chris Lindstrom, Elijah Wilkinson, who looks like he will be the week 1 right tackle as of now, Jack Nelson, Jonathan Gwynn, and Kyle Hinton made the initial roster, right? They made the initial roster for the Falcons. So, obviously, the big thing is Caleb McGarry goes on IR, right? What are the Falcons going to do at that right tackle position? Storm Norton, he's out for 6 to 8 weeks with an ankle surgery. So people are just trying to figure out, okay, what are they going to do with the loss of them? Now, the people were wondering, with all the tackles who got released on cutdown day, where would the Falcons go? They traded for Michael Jarrell from the Seattle Seahawks. They got him back for a conditional 7th round pick. He's a guy, young, developmental player. Again, someone who maybe could have who you view as someone who could have upside, someone you could bring in. Don't know the prospect of him in playing, but he's the guy they brought in, right? They also picked up Carter Warren. He was cut from the Jets. He was the 4th round pick by them in 2023. He's another guy who, young, developing tackle. Both of those guys are going to have an opportunity, I think, to play right tackle. But again, I think Elijah Wilkinson will get that spot to start because he's the most familiar with the offense. But they have clearly prepared themselves to try to have some depth at that tackle spot. And if they have to kind of rotate a little bit, which would be unideal, but if you have some guys that you think we can maybe put in that spot to hold up, because that's really all you're doing when you lose a player like Caleb McGarry, especially when you have Storm Norton coming back, because the perception is that Storm's going to eventually become the starting tackle anyway. So you just need somebody. Can you be comparable? Can you hold up? And you got 3 guys that just named who they're hoping to get that from. We'll see if this leads to them cutting Jack Nelson. I know that's something some people are looking at. Jack Nelson did not have a good preseason, struggled a lot. Maybe the Falcons cut him from the 53-man, put him on the practice squad. I think I saw the Falcons do have 1 practice squad spot still open, so maybe that's what that's for, but we'll have to see. But yeah, so they picked up 2 tackles. Elijah Wilkinson, that's your right tackle until Storm Norton gets back. And then even that, if one of those tackles kind of starts to play really well, Falcons may say we don't have to rush Storm Norton back out there. We can stick with him. And then, like I said, the biggest thing you want in situations like this when you have injuries is just optionality. You want the ability to say we have options. And the Falcons have at least gave themselves options. Now, people are going to debate online, are these guys any good? Do they suck? Oh, my God, they're bad, et cetera, et cetera. Listen, when you're picking up tackles on cut day, I don't think any of these guys are like franchise tackles. So, there's a reason why they're getting cut. But sometimes the situations vary. Some guys can be getting cut because there's just so much talent at one position that they're not bad. It's just they really like the others. Or there's some that is obviously performance-based. So, but both of these guys are young. Both of these guys can get better. And both of these guys are developmental. So, maybe you can get more out of them here. You have a strong offensive line with these guys. So, maybe it helps them be more confident out there as well. So we'll have to see how that kind of works out for the Falcons as they continue to kind of sort through roster decisions. But that's kind of what the tackle position looks like right now. And that's how the offensive line looks overall. Now let's go over to the defensive side of the ball. Let's look at the defensive line. David Amimata, Brandon Dorlus, Lakel London, Rook Roro, and Zach Harrison on the defensive line. Again, some people surprised Kadavius Street was cut. Again, Morgan Fox was cut. And then Simon Barlow was also cut. He was a popular name. I think he was second in interior lineman pass rush rate. I think at the second highest in the preseason. So those were 3 guys that some people were kind of like, okay, Kadavia Street was a guy that kind of had him beef up a little bit this offseason in camp. Like I said, for a lot of the Falcons media members that I've seen, they've seemed a little surprised that he was cut. So essentially, Simeon Barrow, he's a guy that I think some people hoped would even come back on the practice squad, and the Falcons didn't sign him back. Obviously, again, we don't know if that's going to stay that way, but right now he's not on the practice squad as of now. So those were some cuts to the D-line, but I think overall, I think the Falcons feel good about where their D-line is in the grand scheme of things, to me, with those guys, and that's what they wanted to go with. So in terms of, if we look at an edge rusher, we got Arnold Ebiketie, Leonard Floyd, Jalen Walker, James Pierce-Jr., Braylon Trice, and D'Angelo Malone. Now, this is where things got a little also, interesting on social. So, obviously, D'Angelo Malone's been here for a minute, drafted out of Western Kentucky, right? People thought that he may be on the way out, potentially. He's a guy who I think a lot of people kind of just were like over for the most part. I think they were over him. And, they tried him at linebacker during camp. And they like I said, they I remember when, Raheem Morris talked about how the changing of the defense every year has impacted some guys' development. And I think that Malone is a guy who has been impacted by that and everything. But I think that it's nice that Jeff Ulbrich gave him an opportunity to kind of do something a little different, right? Because I feel like he's a bit of an athletic player, right? And linebacker is a question of position, right? So Khalid Kareem, he's a guy who kind of made on the team at the end of last year, had some good snaps, was getting some first and second team snaps in training camp. Some people thought he was going to make the team just because of those things. He had some good games, and people were like, oh, yeah, he'll make the team. He got cut. Now he's back on the practice squad, but he got cut. And people were like, how do you cut Kareem and not cut Malone? Some people talked about Malone's special teams value. He has been a good special teams player for the Falcons since he's been in Atlanta. Kareem is not a special teams guy, right? So there's a little bit of a battle won there by Malone. And then you can get into the nitty-gritty of who's the better pass rusher, who's the better defensive lineman. And, a lot of people may feel like, Kareem has showed more. And that's fair. But I think the Falcons, again, as I've said, have made moves with the roster that show special teams of high value than just a pass rusher. Because they may feel like we have all these other pass rushers in front of them. What do we need at that last pass rusher spot? A pass rusher or a guy who can play special teams and maybe provide a pass rush. And obviously, like I said, that's a debate. Some people think Malone can provide nothing there, and there's some people who think he still can provide something. But again, at that spot, I mean, how many reps is he going to play as well? And like I said, he's also played some linebacker. How did that impact the decision that maybe, hey, if we have some issues at linebacker, we may need to shift Malone there? And so they're like, we just want him already on the team, right? So I know that was a bit of a conversation for some people about the edge room, but that's what they went with. D'Angelo Malone is on the roster, and Kareem is on the practice squad. So that's where we are with that. Obviously, give your thoughts down below about what you think about that and everything else we've talked to up to this point. So inside linebacker, Kate Nellis, Divine Diablo, J.D. Bertrand, and Josh Woods. Congratulations to Josh Woods. Guy's really been a special teams guy, making the roster. Really, I think, had a really good camp, really good preseason for him. I know J.D. Bertrand is kind of falling out of favor with the fact he's had so many concussions. People don't know how much longer he's going to play. People are just like, how do we? I don't love J.D. Bertrand right now. But that's who they have at their inside linebacker position. Caden Ellis and Divine Diablo are going to handle it. We know what Caden Ellis can do. We've heard a lot of praise about Divine Diablo in camp, what he's done, being all over the field, stepping up. We'll see how they are in week 1 against Tampa Bay, but that's kind of where they are with that. Then we go to the nickelback position. AJ Terrell, Mike Hughes, Billy Bowman Jr., Clark Phillips, D. Alford, Mike Ford Jr., and Natron Brooks. I think, again, this position is interesting because a lot of people wondered about Kobe Bryant, who the undrafted free agent from Kansas. And the Falcons cut him, and he's on the practice squad now. He made it through waivers. And I think the Falcons, some people are not really, again, some people are out on Alford, some people are out on Ford. But I think the Falcons, feel like we have guys that we want to keep in our system. And listen, Mike Ford made some plays in camp. He had a couple picks in camp. I think just Mike Ford has never been viewed as a player that you're like, oh, can play corner. But at least in practice, he's been good. Natron Brooks is the guy I think really stands out here. He almost made it last year, made it this year, had a strong camp. He probably, to me, would be your de facto backup outside corner if either AJ or Mike Hughes gets hurt. Your nickel position, I think they're going with Billy Bowman. I think you're hearing reports that Billy Bowman's going to get that job. So D. Alford will probably play more backup nickel, maybe some dime potentially. And then Mike Ford is just there for depth. And then Clark Phillips is there as well, which I'm actually low-key surprised Clark Phillips made it. I don't think he really had a strong camp. But I guess, again, they just don't want to give up on him. So they let him make the roster. And in terms of Kobe Bryant, I think that they want to keep him in the system, let him keep developing. He had an injury that kind of hurt him. Maybe that's the reason why he didn't make the roster. He had that hamstring injury a little bit later in the camp. But a guy I think the Falcons still really like a lot, and I think people like a lot. And I think, again, you let him develop, get a year on his belt. If injuries happen, he'll be called up to the roster, and then we'll see what he can do. Safeties, they only keep 3 safeties. Jesse Bates, Xavier Watts, DeMarco Hellams. Now, the de facto thing here is I said that I didn't think they were going to keep 3 safeties. Jordan Fuller, for some people, was a surprise cut. For some people, it wasn't. It feels like this is essentially saying that they are kind of having Billy Bowman as an emergency safety. Because, again, if Bates or Watts or DeMarco goes down, if you need depth after that, you would assume your next best option would be Billy Bowman because he played safety before. He's primarily played a lot of nickel, though. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that if that happens. But, that's pretty self-explanatory. Xavier Watts clearly wins the job, so he'll start to me. I know some people wondering, would DeMarco Hellams start? I think they'd rather kind of use DeMarco as a third safety, maybe sometimes a box safety at times, because he's more of a physical branded type of safety. So that's what I think they'd rather do there. But, if you look at that group, you're probably people are high on Xavier Watts. People are high on DeMarco Hellams, especially now that he's coming into the regular season healthy this year. And we all know what Jesse Bates can do, the leader of that defense, one of the best, if not the best safety in the game of football. And then obviously specialist Younghoe Koo makes it. Craig gets the international spot. Bradley Pinion, punter. Nothing too crazy and wild there. And then let's see here. Then we look at the practice squad for the Falcons. This is the list. Chris Blair, Kobe Bryant, Dylan Drummond, Joshua Gray, Ronnie Harrison, who I think did actually okay. CJ Henderson is another guy who could be a candidate to be called up. He had a strong camp. Got brought in kind of late, but had a strong camp. So I think CJ Henderson, definitely deserving. Kareem, Lenny, Nick Nash, Brandon Parker, Joshua Simon, Easton Stick, Davius Street, and Carlos Washington Jr. So I think overall with the Falcons, I think they feel good about their practice squad. Again, we'll see if anything changes from that perspective. And like I said, people are going to ask questions of what that could change, what could happen. And because, a good thumb of rule is what we have right now may not be the same in 1 week's time. It may not be the same by week 1, game 1. So things are still fluid. It can still change with the Falcons, but we'll see. And hopefully, as we get into next week, we'll start to kind of get more answers since next week will be game week. And will know where the team is with their roster, who's playing, official injury reports coming out, and kind of just have an idea of what's going to happen and see if guys immediately could get caught up. Because there were guys who put in the practice squad and then were still playing inactive week 1 last year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But obviously, that's where we kind of stand right now with the roster and practice squad for the Falcons. If you guys have any thoughts about what you think of the team, what do you like to see? Do you like the trades? Do you like the signings of the tackle position? Obviously, who do you want them to bring into the practice squad if there's a spot available? Who do you want them to be on the roster? Do you agree with everybody making the team who did? Leave your comments down below for sure. If you enjoyed this episode, like the video, leave a comment as well, and subscribe to the channel as we get closer to Falcons football. And we'll try to get some guests on here as we try to get into a full deep dive of what to expect for this season and even after games in full analysis. But I think that's about it for me. It's your boy Bryce Lewis. See you next time.